one very important discussion here. Is there a difference between Akhbaris and Usulis? A lot of people think the Akhbaris do not believe in Taqlid and they condemn it. And this Taqlid is a new Usuli thing. Something that emerged recently in the last 2-3 centuries. And before that, there was no concept of Taqlid. Briefly, let's go through this idea here. Always, my dear brothers and sisters, when you're confronted with discussions like that, analyze them rationally and logically. Let's say someone makes the claim that no form of Taqlid existed for hundreds of years with the Akhbari scholars. Question. Yes, brother.
What's an Akhbari?
So, that's a good question. What's the difference between Akhbaris and Usulis? They're Shia scholars. The main difference between Akhbaris and Usulis is how, the method that you use to extract fatwas and laws. That's the main difference. For instance, Usulis accept ijma' and consensus, whereas Akhbaris, generally speaking, sometimes would not accept ijma' and consensus. If your only proof for a fiqh ruling is consensus, maybe an Akhbari scholar would not accept that. Secondly, we find that Usuli scholars give more prominence to the science of Rijal, biography, where they examine the sanad and the chain of narration. Whereas Akhbaris basically would tell you everything in Kafi is correct. I don't need to go and investigate who the narrators are. All these hadiths are sahih. The Usuli says, no, I need to investigate. Each chain, I have to look at it. And that's another difference between them. Another difference between Akhbaris and Usulis is when it comes to ash-shubha tahrimiyya. If we have a doubt about something being haram, let's say tobacco, smoking. If it's not excessively posing harm to you, someone occasionally wants to smoke, let's say, is smoking haram in Sharia or no? The scholar looks at Quran and Hadith, there's no Hadith about that, right? Because smoking, let's say, did not exist at the time. The Akhbari says, whenever I have a doubt about something being haram, my belief is I have to exercise caution. I have to consider it haram unless I have proof that it's halal. The Usuli says the opposite. The Usuli comes from a school of thought. He says, if I have doubt that something is halal or haram, I don't find any evidence for it being haram, then I assume by default it's what? It's halal. So these are the differences between the Usulis and the Akhbaris. There are other differences, but basically they're scholars, they're expert in their field. Just the way, the methods by which they extract Islamic laws is a little bit different. So it's attributed to the Akhbaris that they banned Taqlid and Taqlid did not exist. I have a rational question. Let's go back to those centuries, 1,000 years ago. How did the people in villages and communities and cities, how did they practice their fiqh? Are you telling me that the average Joe, well, in that part of the world, the average Ali and Zayd and Muhammad picks up the book of Kafi that had 16,000 narrations and says, okay, let me read this chapter. I got my Hajj figured out, my Salah figured out, my interest, my business transactions, my khums, I've got it all figured out. Is that how it was? Impossible. Today, I as a seminary student, I pick up the book of Kafi, I'm confused in some parts. With 10, 20 years of experience, I still need to refer to experts. You think a layman is going to pick up the book of Kafi and figure out everything? Impossible. How? Especially women. In that society, they didn't have access to education. A lot of them did not even read and write. We know rationally the spirit of Taqlid definitely must have existed. Those laymen would just go ask their local scholars. They had no other way. Tell me, what was the other way? You want it to be a decent Shia who practices your religion, practicing Quran and the Sunnah. Tell me how. How would you do that during the Akhbari era? Let's say we abolish this whole system of Taqlid. Do not follow any scholar. So what do? Tell me. Quran, you're not an expert on Quran. Most people today, with all the information age that we have, believe me, they don't know anything about Quran. Just tell them simple things about Quran. Just words. Just the names of the surahs. They don't know what they mean. Ask them. Ask in the community today. Ask people, what does Surah Al-Zukhruf mean? Just tell me the name of Zukhruf. I don't want you to go deep into just tell me what Zukhruf means. 99% of the people in the community would not be able to answer you. Tell me what Ahqaf means. Tell me what this verse means. Tell me what Jathiyah. Jathiyah, what's Jathiyah? You think people were using their intellect and knowledge to come up with rulings when they don't know the basics of Quran? Let alone hadith, the thousands of... So we know it was impossible for someone to be practicing and just referring to the books. In an era, especially when books were not accessible. You had to be rich to own a book of Kafi back then. Paper was expensive, everything was expensive. So tell me, during the Akhbari era, what did people do? How do you become practicing? Give me the alternative. What would people do? Rationally speaking. If you're not following scholars, if you're not following a scholar, then what were you doing? How'd you figure out your religion for us? Wait for what? Wait for ilham. Wait for divine inspiration. So you get the idea, my dear brothers and sisters? Those who say there was absolutely no form of taqlid, that's a big fallacy. So what was different then about taqlid? There is a difference, we won't deny that. There is a big difference. The main difference that happened in taqlid is that in the last 3 centuries, we find, for instance, from the 8th century of the Hijrah, during the era of al-Shahid al-Awwal, who was one of the great Shia scholars in Lebanon, from Jabal Amir, and also in the 10th century, with al-Muhaqqiq al-Karaki. This is during the Safavid dynasty in Persia, in Iran. Basically, scholars gained a more central position in society, and even the title Shaykh al-Islam was given to maraji' like al-Muhaqqiq al-Karaki. And so we find the taqlid, the concept of taqlid, even though it existed since the days of the Imams, peace be upon them, we find it becoming more centralized. In the past, because Shias never had a state, never had a strong society, always persecuted, they were scattered in villages and some communities, so they would just refer to a local scholar who was an expert. That was their form of taqlid. But when you had the Safavi empire or dynasty in Iran and Persia, now you had a state ruled by Shias. Yeah, they were not scholars, they were kings and royals, but they were Shia. And a lot of them did have respect for the scholars. So when that happened, you found some prominent scholars who were known for their knowledge, they became in a position where other villages and other cities came to know about them and to follow them. So taqlid became centralized. And now people, even though they lived in different villages, they would ask, well, who's the main scholar in Isfahan, in Qazwin, in Tehran, in Mashhad, in Najaf? Who are those main scholars? Because now Shias had a community and state. So they started becoming more and more connected with each other compared to the past. Taqlid became more systematized and more centralized. And yes, and with that, scholars gained more power. Obviously, you gain more influence. If you've got 100 people, local villagemen following you, or you've got 10,000 people around the country following you, obviously your area and sphere of influence is going to be greater. So the concept of taqlid at its core is the same. Akhbari, Usuli, they accept the basics of taqlid. Yes, following a marji' who has that central influence, that's something that came later on. By the way, I'll be honest with you, the Akhbaris did try to fight that. They believed it's not healthy to have a religious figure of authority having so much influence and power, because the risks then are greater. If that person turns out to be corrupt, then they could damage the entire society. So they just weren't comfortable when that transition was happening. And that's why they kind of condemned the system, because of these concerns, which are valid concerns. I mean, imagine if someone sits in that position of power and they are let's say, corrupt people, right? Imagine the damage that they could do. And that's exactly what happened with Sunni schools of thought. These corrupt, deviant leaders of schools of thought came, and people trusted them, and they started a history of deviation because they were not qualified. So the Akhbaris had these reservations. We know we don't want the scholars to have too much power and influence, because then there's a risk that somebody can abuse that power, somebody can take advantage of that. Otherwise, the idea of taqlid was the same. And then we get to the discussion of Wilayat al-Faqih. How much authority does the scholar have? So historically, the Akhbaris and most Usulis have said the only power or authority that a scholar has is in issuing fatwas. What's halal and what's haram, explain that for us. Number two, they are guardians of those who don't have guardianship. Let's say someone dies, his family members die, is a child, has no guardian, no father, no grandfather, no uncle. The marji' is their guardian. He will look out for their well-being. If there's a mosque, which is a waqf, religious endowment, usually there is someone who has the guardianship over it, right? Let's say there's a mosque, a charitable institution, any type of waqf, endowment, religious endowment, that has no guardianship. By default, we have hadiths that state the scholar becomes the guardian. So historically, most scholars understood from the text that this is the area of influence of a scholar. Recently, scholars started re-examining the text, and they had different interpretations. So some of them said, no, the wilayah, the authority of the jurist, of the scholar, is much more than that. They can be heads of state, they could issue political orders, and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into this discussion because that in itself is a very detailed discussion. But we find in the last 3 centuries, because now Shias had governments and communities, naturally scholars started to have more and more influence at a greater and more global scale. This doesn't mean that these scholars now invented taqlid. No, the taqlid was always there, but it became more institutionalized, I would say.
So could I use this as a reason to say, well, see, there has been some form of corruption that has made its way into this.
So where's the corruption then? See, when something becomes institutionalized, the risks can be greater for corruption, but the benefits are much greater. Why does every government, even democratically elected governments, why do they institutionalize ministries and services for the people? Why? Why do you have the Department of Justice? Why do you have human, human resources, Department of Education? Why institutionalize all of that? Let people figure it out. See, because you want to help the people, connect the people, protect their rights. So when taqlid and marja'iyya started to become more institutionalized, people had more access to them. With better resources, they could fund more projects, give more strength to the seminaries. Because historically, Shias were persecuted. They did not have the resources. Now that you have the resources, you can serve the people, you can serve the religion. It's not necessarily bad. Yes, the potential to take advantage of it can also be greater. Just like a government who has all these institutions, if they want to go rogue against the people, they've got more power. But does that disqualify these institutions? Not necessarily. So this doesn't mean that these scholars invented something new. With better resources, with more political backing, you can offer more services. And that's why you find some aspects being institutionalized. So it's not too fair to say that Akhbaris were anti-taqlid and then Usulis invented it. No, taqlid always existed, but during the Usuli era, the last 3 centuries, yes, it did become more institutionalized. That's a reality. But is that a bad thing? No, not necessarily. In fact, if you look at one of the areas of strength for the Shia is the fact that they had these institutions. Without them, their enemies could have easily obliterated them and decimated them. But these institutions really protected so many communities. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Yes, people just have to be careful whom they're following, someone who's trustworthy. So that's the main idea in examining, taqlid and the difference between the Akhbaris and the Usulis here. Any questions about this point? Yes.
Is there still Akhbaris and Usulis today?
We still have Akhbaris today, by the way. They're not the majority. Most scholars today are Usuli, but there are Akhbaris who still look at texts a little bit differently, who might have a different vision of how people should do Taqlid, right? Or they're a little bit critical of institutionalizing all of that. Yes, we do have Akhbaris, even in the seminaries.